Take your hands off that thermostat. This is my house now, and I set the rules. That's what my granddaughter said to me, standing in the doorway of the den I'd slept in for the past year. It was January in Vermont, 11 degrees outside, and she'd just turned the heat down to 62 because, in her words, "Grandma, the bill came, and it's insane, and honestly, you're the one home all day." I was holding a mug of tea I'd made to warm my hands. I didn't drop it. I didn't say a word. I just stood there in my cardigan in the house I had paid for, and I felt something close shut inside me like a screen door in the wind. Her name is Mackenzie. She's 28. And up until that morning, I would have told anyone who asked that she was the light of my life. Let me back up, because if you don't understand how I got here, you will think I'm a fool. And maybe I was. But I want you to see it the way I saw it. Slow. The way the water heats up around you before you notice you're already boiling. I'm 67 years old. My name is Adeline Crane, and I spent 31 years teaching 4th grade in a small town outside Burlington. My husband Walter drove a delivery route for a bakery distributor and then later managed the warehouse. We weren't rich. We were the kind of people who clipped coupons and still took one good vacation a year, who paid off our little house the year I turned 55 and cried at the kitchen table when the last check cleared. We had one daughter, Marianne. And Marianne had Mackenzie when she was just 20, barely out of high school herself, the father long gone before the baby could walk. So Walter and we didn't just dote on that little girl, we helped raise her. She spent more nights in our spare room than she did anywhere else. I packed her lunches. I taught her to read sitting in my lap. When Marianne worked doubles at the hospital, it was me at the school plays, me at the parent conferences, me holding the back of the bicycle seat and then letting go. Marianne passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught too late, gone in 14 months. I won't talk much about that here because some grief doesn't fit into words, and trying to squeeze it in only cheapens it. But I'll tell you that when she died, Mackenzie and I held on to each other like two people in the same shipwreck. She was the only piece of my daughter I had left, and I think I would have given that girl my own 2 hands if she'd asked for them. Walter died 18 months after Marianne. His heart, they said, though I've always believed it was grief wearing a different name. And there I was, 65 years old, alone in a house that suddenly had too many rooms and too much quiet. I'd hear the furnace kick on and think it was Walter coming up from the basement. I set 2 cups out for coffee for almost a month before I could make myself stop. That's when Mackenzie came to me. She was renting a cramped apartment in the city, working as a dental hygienist, and she sat at my kitchen table one Sunday and took both my hands and said, "Grandma, this is crazy. You're alone in this big house, and I'm throwing money away on rent. Let me move in. We'll take care of each other. It'll be like old times." And God help me, I wanted old times more than I wanted air. So she moved in. The first few months were genuinely sweet. She'd bring home takeout on Fridays. We watched our shows. She'd let me tell the same stories about her mother, and she'd laugh in the right places. I felt, for the first time since the funerals, like the house had a heartbeat again. But here's where I made my mistake, and I want you younger folks listening to hear this part clearly, because it's the part nobody warns you about. About 6 months in, Mackenzie started talking about money. Not asking for it, not at first. Just talking. About how renting was a trap. How owning was the only way to build anything in this country anymore. How her friends from high school were all stuck because their parents couldn't help them and nobody had a head start. And then she'd look at me and she'd say, "You're so lucky you and Grandpa own this place free and clear." I started to feel guilty. Can you believe that? Guilty for having worked 31 years and paid off a modest 3-bedroom house. She had a way of making my security feel like something I'd stolen from her future. Then came the pitch. She brought it up gently, over a dinner she'd cooked special, pot roast, my favorite. She said she'd been talking to a mortgage person at her bank, that if I added her name to the deed as a co-owner, she could finally start building equity, that it wouldn't cost me anything. that it just made sense since she lived here and was going to inherit it all someday anyway. "It's just paperwork, Grandma," she said. "It just makes it official that we're a team. And honestly, it protects you too. If anything happened to you, it'd avoid all that probate mess that Mom went through." I remember that last part landed hard. The probate mess. I'd watched Marianne's small estate get tangled up in courts and lawyers for over a year. The idea of putting Mackenzie through that broke my heart. So I said I'd think about it. And she said, "Don't think too long. The rates are changing. Always a hurry. Always a reason it had to be now." I should have noticed that. The good ones never rush you. A few weeks later, she came home with a folder. Said she'd had a lawyer friend draw everything up to save me the trouble and the fee. There were several pages. She'd flagged the lines for me to sign with little colored tabs, the way you do for a child. I had my reading glasses somewhere, I couldn't find them, and she said, "It's all standard, Grandma. I read every word, I promise. It's the same thing they explained at the bank." And I signed. I signed because she was my daughter's daughter. I signed because I trusted the only family I had left in this world. I signed because I'd held that little girl when she had the chicken pox and rocked her through the night, and the thought that she would ever hurt me was as foreign to me as the far side of the moon. I want to tell you what changed and when, because it didn't happen all at once. The first thing was small. She got a boyfriend, Brett, and he started staying over. Then staying more. Then his truck was in the driveway every morning, and his protein powder was in my cabinet. Nobody asked me. When I mentioned it, gently Mackenzie said, "Grandma, I live here too. You can't dictate who I have over." Which was technically true now, wasn't it? I'd made it true with my own signature. Then the tone shifted. Little corrections. "Don't run the dishwasher half full. It wastes water." "Why do you keep the porch light on? Do you know what electricity costs? You don't need to cook a whole meal for yourself. It's wasteful." Each comment alone was nothing, a pebble. But she was building a wall out of pebbles, and I was on the wrong side of it. She started rearranging things. My late husband's recliner went out to the garage because Brett wanted to put in a sectional. The framed photos of Marianne in the hallway got consolidated into one small frame on a back shelf because the new aesthetic was minimal. My garden, the perennial beds Walter and I had built over 20 years, got torn up over one weekend while I was at my church group and replaced with gravel and a fire pit because Brett liked to entertain. I cried about the garden in the bathroom with the fan on so they wouldn't hear, and then the thermostat, that morning in January. "This is my house now, and I set the rules." She said it so casually. That's what got me. Not anger, I could have understood. It was the casualness, like she was correcting a tenant who'd overstepped, like I was a house guest who'd worn out her welcome. I went back to the den, that's what they called it now. The den, my bedroom, and I sat down on the daybed they'd given me when they took the master bedroom. Because there's two of us and one of you, it just makes sense. And I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. And I did the math I should have done a long time before. I was cold in my own house. I was asking permission to cook food in my own kitchen. My husband's share was rotting in a garage, and my daughter's face was on a back shelf, and I had been moved into the smallest room like a piece of furniture. Nobody had the heart to throw out yet. And then a worse thought came, the one that had been waiting at the bottom of me. If she felt this bold while I was still alive and well, what exactly had I signed? That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I got up. The house was dark and quiet, Brett snoring coming through the wall that used to be mine. I went down to the little desk in the corner of the dining room where I'd always kept my files, my insurance, my bank statements, the appliance warranties. I wanted to find my copy of the deed paperwork. It wasn't there. My file box, the grey metal one I'd had for 30 years, had been moved. I found it, finally, up on the top shelf of the hall closet, pushed all the way back behind the spare blankets, somewhere I'd never reach without the step stool. And when I got it down and opened it, my copies of the house documents were gone. Just gone. The folder was there. It was empty. I stood in that hallway in my nightgown at 2:30 in the morning, and I felt the cold go all the way through me, and it had nothing to do with the thermostat. I didn't confront her. Some instinct, maybe the same one that kept 31 years of fourth graders from ever seeing me lose my temper, told me that the moment I let on what I suspected, I'd lose whatever advantage I had left. So I did something I'm not proud of and would do again in a heartbeat. I waited and I watched, and I started writing things down. The next morning I was sweetness itself. I made pancakes. I told Mackenzie the gravel patio was really growing on me. I asked Brett about his job at the car dealership and listened to him talk for 20 minutes about boat motors. And I watched where Mackenzie kept her things now, which was the master bedroom, in a little fireproof safe she'd bought. The kind with a keypad, sitting right out on the dresser like she didn't think the old lady would ever be a problem. I started going to the library, told them I was joining a book club, which was half true. I did eventually join one, but mostly I used the computers. I looked up how to get a copy of a property deed, and I learned you can just request it from the county recorder's office, that it's public record, that no one can hide it from you. I drove down there on a Tuesday while Mackenzie was at work, and I paid $11, and I held the copy in my hands in the parking lot, and I made myself read every line. My name was still on it, but so was hers. And there was a phrase I didn't understand, so I wrote it down and I asked the clerk, and she pointed me to joint tenants with right of survivorship. She explained kindly what that meant, that if I died, the whole house would pass to Mackenzie automatically, outside of any will, instantly, cleanly, no probate, just like she promised. That part at least was real. But then I drove home and I thought about it more, and a colder understanding settled in. With her name on that deed as a full joint owner, she had as much right to that house as I did. Right now, while I was still breathing. She could, I would later learn, even force a sale if she wanted to, drag the whole thing into court and make them split it. She hadn't lied to me exactly. She'd just shown me one door while quietly building another. But here's the thing I needed to know, the thing that would decide everything. How had I signed it? Because I remembered her telling me it was co-owner paperwork. I did not remember anyone explaining survivorship or what it meant that she'd have equal present-day rights. I didn't remember a lawyer. I didn't remember a notary. And I learned at the library that a deed transfer needs to be notarized. So one of two things was true. Either I'd had something explained to me that I genuinely didn't understand, which is a hard case to make in court, or there was something wrong with how those papers got signed and witnessed. I needed to know which, and I needed help. I tell you, the hardest phone call I ever made wasn't to the lawyer. It was to my sister-in-law, Walter's younger sister, who lived 2 states away and whom I'd grown distant from after the funerals. Her name is Pauline, and she'd worked as a paralegal for 30 years before she retired. I'd been too proud and too sunk in grief to keep up with her. And now I was calling to admit that I'd been swindled by the granddaughter I'd bragged about in every Christmas card. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't say anything but, "Oh, Addie." And then don't sign anything else. Not one thing. And don't let her know you're asking questions. Let me make some calls. Pauline found me a lawyer, a woman named Teresa Okafor, who specialized in elder financial abuse, which is a phrase I had never heard applied to me and which made me feel about 100 years old the first time she said it. I drove 40 minutes to her office on a Thursday, wearing my church clothes because I wanted to be taken seriously, and I laid it all out, the deed, the missing copies, the rushed signing, the thermostat, the garden, the back shelf, all of it. She listened the way you'd want a doctor to listen. And when I finished, she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Mrs. Crane, I want you to understand that what you're describing, an elderly homeowner being moved into a small room, isolated from her possessions, rushed into signing property documents she didn't understand, this is a pattern. It has a name. You are not a foolish woman. You were targeted by someone who knew exactly how much you loved her. I have to tell you, I'd been holding myself together for weeks, and that sentence is what finally broke me. I cried right there in her office, ugly, gulping, crying, and she handed me a box of tissues and waited, and didn't make me feel small about it. Then we got to work. Teresa told me that everything would hinge on how that deed got executed. She requested the recorded document with all its attachments. And when it came back, the first thing she looked at was the notary block. There was a notary stamp on it. A man named Gerald Voss. And the date. I looked at that date and my stomach turned over, because I knew exactly where I'd been that day. It was the week of my hip injection. I'd had a cortisone shot and spent 3 days barely able to walk, drugged up on the muscle relaxers they'd given me. I have the medical records. I have the pharmacy receipt. I was not in any state to drive to a notary's office, and more to the point, I never did. No notary had ever sat across from me in my life. I would have remembered a stranger watching me sign. Teresa got very quiet and very focused. She said, "Mrs. Motraith Crane, a notary is required to witness your signature in person and verify your identity. If you never appeared before this notary, that's notary fraud. And notary fraud, and it potentially makes the entire transfer void." We looked up Gerald Voss. He was a mobile notary. And here's the part that still makes me sick. With a little digging, Teresa's office found that Gerald Voss had done 2 other notarizations that same month for the same person, paid through the same account. The account belonged to Brett's mother, who, it turned out, ran a small document services business out of her home. They'd kept it in the family. Brett's family, not mine. It had all been arranged. The folder with the colored tabs, the lost reading glasses she was so quick to talk past, the hurry, always the hurry. The notary who'd stamped a document for a woman he'd never met because someone he knew had asked him to and slicked him a little extra. I asked Teresa what we did now, and she told me the truth, which I appreciated even though it scared me. She said we could file to void the deed transfer based on the fraudulent notarization, and that we had strong grounds, but that it would not be quick or quiet. Mackenzie and Brett would be served, they would know. They would likely fight it, and I would have to keep living in that house, at least for a while, with people who would by then know exactly what I'd done. "Can they kick me out?" I asked her. "No," she said. "You're still a legal owner, with full rights to live there, and once we file, I'll request the court protect your residence. But Mrs. Crane, I won't lie to you, it's going to get ugly inside that house before it gets better. Can you handle that?" I thought about Walter's recliner rotting in the garage. I thought about being told to take my hands off the thermostat in the house where I'd nursed my dying daughter. And I said, I taught 4th grade for 31 years. I can handle anything. We filed. And I'll be honest with you, the days waiting for them to be served were the worst of the whole ordeal, worse than the trial that came later, because I had to keep playing the sweet old grandmother across the breakfast table from a young woman I now knew had drugged my own trust and stolen my home out from under me. I poured her coffee. I asked about her day, and every night I went into the den, my bedroom, and I wrote down everything that had happened, the comments, the slights, the time she said my house, because Teresa had told me to document it all. The day the sheriff's deputy came to the door, Mackenzie was home. I was in the kitchen. I heard her open the door, heard the official voice, heard the rustle of papers, and then I heard the silence, that long, terrible silence right before the storm. She came into the kitchen with the papers in her hand, and her face was white. "What is this?" she said. "What did you do?" I didn't pretend. I was done pretending. I set down my dish towel and I looked at the granddaughter I'd raised, and I said, "I requested the deed from the county. There was a notary stamp on it, from a man I've never met, on a day I couldn't walk." I watched it move across her face, the calculation, the search for the right lie. And then Brett came in from the garage, and it all came apart. He started yelling about how I was ungrateful, about how they'd taken care of me, an old woman who couldn't even manage a house anymore, about how I was going to die alone now, after I drove away the only family I had. That word, family, he used it like a club. And Mackenzie, my Mackenzie, the little girl I taught to read. She said the thing I'll carry to my grave. She said, "You're seriously going to do this to me? Over a house you can't even take with you? Over a house you can't even take with you? Over a house I couldn't take with me? As if my only value was the property under me. As if the years, the lunches, the school plays, the back of the bicycle seat, as if none of that had been real. As if she'd only ever been waiting for the house." I didn't yell. I promised myself I wouldn't. I just said very quietly, "I'm not doing anything to you, sweetheart. I'm undoing something you did to me." And I went into my room and I called Teresa and she said, "Good. Now don't say another word to them without me. And if you feel unsafe, you call me or you call the police day or night." It got bad after that, the way she'd warned me. They stopped speaking to me entirely, which honestly was a mercy. But then Brett started in with the petty cruelties. The Wi-Fi password got changed. My name came off the streaming accounts. The good parking spot in the driveway where I could get to the door without crossing ice got taken every morning. I let it all go. I had a court date. I had a folder of medical records and pharmacy receipts and a notary stamp from a day I was bedridden. I had Pauline driving up to stay with me the week of the hearing. Let them take the parking spot. The hearing itself was smaller and stranger than I expected. No dramatic jury, just a judge, a tired-looking man with reading glasses, in a courtroom that smelled like floor wax. Mackenzie and Brett had a lawyer, a slick one, who argued that I'd known exactly what I was signing, that I'd wanted to provide for my granddaughter, that this was a case of a confused old woman with seller's remorse trying to renege on a gift. That word again. Confused. Old. They kept reaching for it like a tool. But Teresa was not slick, she was precise. She put up the deed and the notary block and the date. And then she put up my medical records from that exact date, the cortisone injection, the prescription for muscle relaxers, the doctor's note advising bed rest. And then she called the notary, Gerald Voss, who'd been subpoenaed, and who, under oath, with his own license on the line, could not say that he had ever met me, could not pick me out of the room, could not explain how my signature came to be notarized in his presence on a day I was 3 towns away, unable to walk, with a witness, my next-door neighbor who'd brought me soup, ready to testify to it. The slick lawyer's argument fell apart, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a slow, grinding way, like a car running out of gas. You could see it. The judge's face changing, Mackenzie's face changing. When it was my turn to speak, the lawyer asked me in that gentle, condescending way whether I'd simply changed my mind about helping my granddaughter, whether I'd grown bitter and decided to punish her. And I said no. I said I would have given her the house. If she had asked me honestly, sat down at my kitchen table and asked me, I'd have signed it over with my whole heart. That's the part that breaks me. She didn't need to steal what I'd have given for free. But a person who lied to take what you'd have given freely, that's a person who was never really after the gift. They were after the taking. The courtroom was very quiet after that. I hadn't planned to say it. It just came up out of the bottom of me, the truest thing I knew. The judge ruled 3 weeks later. He found that the notarization was fraudulent, that I had never appeared before the notary, and that the deed transfer was therefore void. My granddaughter's name came off the house. It was mine again, free and clear, the way Walter and I had earned it. He also referred the matter of the notary, Gerald Voss, and the document services arrangement to the state for investigation, which I understand caused Brett's mother a great deal of trouble down the line, though I never followed it closely. I'd had enough of other people's trouble. I didn't feel the way I thought I would. I'd imagined some kind of triumph, some warm flood of vindication. Instead, I just felt tired and sad and very, very quiet. Because winning meant it was true. Winning meant the little girl I'd rocked through the chickenpox had really done this. There's no version of that ruling where I got my granddaughter back. I gave them 30 days to move out. Teresa handled all of it, so I never had to argue with them again. Mackenzie didn't say goodbye. The morning they left, I heard the truck doors slamming and Brett swearing and the engine pulling away, and then the house was silent in a way it hadn't been in 2 years. I went out to the garage and I brought Walter's recliner back inside myself, an inch at a time, stopping to rest, and I set it back in its spot by the window. I took my daughter's photographs down off the back shelf and I hung them in the hallway again, all of them in the good light. And then I turned the thermostat up to 70. And I sat in my husband's chair in my warm house and I let myself cry. Not for the house was just a house, but for the girl who used to fall asleep in my lap before she became a stranger. It's been a little over a year now. I had the gravel hauled away and Pauline helped me put the perennial beds back in, and this past spring the peonies Walter planted came up anyway, stubborn things, right through where the fire pit had been. I joined that book club for real. I host it now on Wednesdays in my living room with the good lamps on and no one telling me what the electricity costs. Mackenzie wrote me a letter about 6 months back. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope and I held it for a long time before I opened it. It said she was sorry. It said Brett had left her once the money dried up. It said she hoped someday I could forgive her and we could be a family again. I sat with that letter for a week. I'm her grandmother. Some part of me will love that girl until the day I die, and that part wanted nothing more than to call her up and tell her to come home. All is forgiven. But I've learned something at 67 that I wish I'd known at 60. Loving someone and trusting them are not the same thing, and you are allowed to keep the first while you let go of the second. I wrote her back. I told her I forgave her because I had, for my own sake, more than hers. And I told her that forgiveness and trust are different rooms in the same house, and that the door to the second one was going to stay locked for a good long while, maybe forever, and that this was not cruelty. It was the only way I knew to keep the rest of myself safe. I never heard back. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe a girl who only wanted the house has no use for a grandmother who's keeping it. I'll leave you with this, whoever you are, listening to an old woman tell her story. If somebody who loves you ever puts a stack of papers in front of you and stands over your shoulder telling you it's standard, it's nothing. Hurry up and sign. That's the moment to slow all the way down. Get your own glasses. Get your own lawyer. Make them wait. The people who truly love you will always, always be willing to wait while you understand what you're signing. It's only the ones who are off to the taking, who can't stand to give you the time. I'm warm tonight. My husband's chair fits me like it always did. My daughter's face is in the good light where it belongs. And the house is mine, every cold and creaking inch of it, right down to the thermostat. The cold I felt that January morning wasn't really about 62 degrees on a thermostat. It was the cold of finally seeing what I'd refused to see for 2 years. And I'd thought a lot, in the quiet of my warm house now, about how I let it get that far, because I don't think I was simply unlucky. I think I confused loving Mackenzie with trusting her, and those are two different things that I'd let blur together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Here is what I've come to understand. Every step downhill had a cause, and every cause was a small surrender on my part. I gave up my reading glasses to her reassurance. I gave up my husband's recliner to keep the peace. I gave up the photos of my own daughter to her idea of a tidy hallway. None of those were the house, but each one taught her that I would fold, and so the day came when she reached for the deed itself, and why wouldn't she? I had trained her to believe I'd never push back. The thermostat wasn't the beginning of her cruelty. It was the harvest of all those quiet surrenders. What saved me in the end wasn't anger, though God knows I had a right to it. It was deciding to do the right thing in the right way, refusing to scream when screaming was all I wanted, refusing to sink to Brett's level of insults across a kitchen table. There's a strength in holding your dignity when someone is counting on you to lose it, but dignity alone wouldn't have won. I had to be willing to learn what I didn't know. To sit at a library computer at 66 years old and figure out what a deed was, to swallow my pride and call Pauline, to let Teresa say the words, elder financial abuse out loud and not crumble. Clear thinking is its own kind of courage, and I'd undervalued mine my whole life because I was just a 4th grade teacher, not somebody important. And then there was the simple matter of not quitting, of getting up every morning and pouring coffee for the very person trying to rob me, of waiting out months of ugliness because I knew the truth was on my side. Endurance isn't loud, it's just refusing to lie down one more day than you have to. If I could reach back and tell the woman holding that mug of tea anything, I'd tell her this: be good, but never let your goodness make you blind. Be kind, but keep your eyes open. Love people fully, and still make them wait while you read every line. The world is full of folks who count on the loving ones to never ask questions. Don't make their work easy. Stay warm. Stay clear. And never ever hand over the thing you earned just because someone you love can't stand to let you understand it first.